Okay. Are you seeing the screen now? Same screen?
Yeah,
Yes.
I see it.
Okay, so that was easy. Yeah, I forgot to start the recording. Once information hits the peripheral nervous system, it's going to go to the central nervous system. It's got to go either right to the brain or more likely to the spinal cord and from there to the brain, and then back and out. Going out through the motor division, also known as the efferent nervous system, like effervesce, to come out. And that motor impulse collection, sending signals to do something, do something, is split up to the somatic nervous system, which is probably better called the voluntary nervous system. This innervates or causes to act the muscles of the skeletal system, skeletal muscles. On the other side, the other impulses activate the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, usually just abbreviated ANS, this innervates or causes to act smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glandular epithelium. Here it says glands. That's fine. I prefer actually glandular epithelium, but a lot of books put glands. Okay, so this is the part you don't have control over. This is the involuntary nervous system. This is the autonomic nervous system. This is the ANS. All of those names apply here. So if you're innervating smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, okay, you have two systems, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic and parasympathetic. Think about it for a second. Motor commands go to the voluntary nervous system, and they cause skeletal muscles to contract. They may cause the biceps to contract. Later, they may change and cause the triceps to contract. They're going to work opposite each other. Muscles always have another opposite, unless it's a facial muscle. They always have opposites. The gastrocnemius has the tibialis anterior opposite. Okay, so they work oppositely from each other so that you can get back to a different state or the state that you started from. Otherwise, you're going to be bent out of shape. In the autonomic nervous system, it innervates smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Okay. And in many of these instances, not all of them, but in many of these instances, you need to get back to where you were. So you might stimulate a gland to secrete, and then you might innervate a gland not to secrete or to cease secretion. The stomach may be innervated to contract, and then it may be innervated also not to contract. So we need opposite systems here. We need yin and yang, push and pull. And we do have two systems. We have the sympathetic division, which we'll be talking about in a moment, and the parasympathetic division. Okay, now I realize if you know anything about what we're talking about here ahead of time, it's because you either knew it or you have read the chapter already. For the first timer, the person seeing it the first time, I'm a little bit more concerned. But for anybody, before we move on, do you have any question about this? Okay. Now I've got a couple of paragraphs for you to read. I wrote some time ago. The autonomic nervous system is a subdivision of the peripheral nervous system. Again, it innervates smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glandular epithelium. I've already said that 3 times. That's how important I feel that is. The ANS is controlled by the hypothalamus. We learned that when we studied the brain, although I haven't tested you on that fact until this Thursday. And it's composed of 2 factions, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. What these systems are, we're coming to. Okay. It's only a generalization right here, but the sympathetic system usually primes the body for action. It's the so-called fight or flight syndrome. Okay. It can come on very fast. If you are driving, and I'm not going to say texting, it would just be bad, but you get distracted somehow by someone, by something. I'm sure a lot of you, if not all of you, have had to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. Maybe you didn't make it, but you still did that job of slamming on the brakes. Well, do you remember the feeling? The feeling of fright, the feeling of also resignation when you realize you're not going to be uh, making it, uh, the surprise, and your body just tenses up and gets your foot on that brake. The sympathetic nervous system is priming you for fight or flight, even though you may not be able to do either of them. It's getting you revved up. The parasympathetic system will dominate during less stressful situations, less stressful times. Both of these systems, parasympathetic and back to the first one, the sympathetic, both of them work all of the time on all of your organs. It's just the degree to which they work. In other words, generally, it's the parasympathetic system in milder times that is doing most of the work. But when it's necessary, the sympathetic system jumps in. And I literally mean jumps in very fast, uh, to protect you. Both are active at all times, but one can predominate over the other when necessary. This one sentence is not ambiguous. Your body has control over the ANS and you do not. Now, somebody will tell you, oh, if you do a mantra, if you do yoga, if you do relaxation therapy, you can have some control. I believe it. I believe it. But in general, for most people, and even those of us who think that we can partially control it, you got to think about doing that. And most of the time, we walk around with very little thinking going on. Okay, again, I'm asking you to have chapter 12 open for yourself. An autonomic nervous system pathway runs from the CNS to an innervated organ. Pick the stomach, if you will. Okay, there's going to be two neurons, always two. And when I say ANS pathway, I mean both sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, getting the nervous impulse to the stomach or to the liver or to the large intestine follows a pathway that is 2 neurons long. The neuron that starts in the CNS, because remember, every incoming stimulus has to reach the CNS first. And then it can flip over to, and on the way out, it can go to the autonomic nervous system. The first neuron starts in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Okay. You should probably be familiar with gray matter if you study this weekend getting ready for the exam. This neuron is called the preganglionic neuron. Formidable little word, but you'll have no problem with it soon. This neuron carries the nervous impulse to the second neuron. There's only going to be two, and this is called the postganglionic neuron. So we have preganglionic neuron, then we must have a ganglion, and then we must have the postganglionic neuron. That's said in the next sentence. When the two neurons meet, that's the preganglionic and postganglionic, there's a physical gap between them called the synaptic cleft, or just routinely called the synapse. Looking down at the chart, here's the first neuron. It starts within the spinal cord, not drawn here, in the gray matter. If it shoots an impulse called an action potential, it will go away from the cell body to the axon branches, otherwise known as the teleodendria. This first cell is called the preganglionic, or in this case, presynaptic cell. What's the difference? This is one cell. This is one cell, and it's going to meet up with one cell. That's presynaptic. When we say preganglionic, we have a duplicate of this, a duplicate of this, a triplicate, quadruplicate. We had dozens, if not hundreds, of these to form a nerve. This is just a neural pathway. This is by no means a nerve. We need lots of these doing the same thing. And then if we have that, this area that we're calling synapse in this drawing would be a ganglion. The ganglion is a group of neural cell bodies. Here they are here. Found in the peripheral nervous system. That definition is in last week's notes. Okay, come along. We reach this spot here. This is called a synapse. There's a space between the axon branch and the dendrite of the postganglionic cell or neuron. We use the word cell, but neuron is a cell. Okay, so 1, 2. What would attach here? Another neuron? Hell no. We've already got 1, 2. That's it. The pathway is 2 neurons long. So we must reach the destination here, and the stomach, if that's what we had in mind, should be out here. The preganglionic neuron, the first neuron, gives off a chemical called a neurotransmitter that crosses the small gap right here and excites the postganglionic neuron's dendrites. This gap to be crossed is the synapse. You have to have enough neurotransmitter coming across to sufficiently excite the postganglionic neuron at the axon hillock. Otherwise, an impulse is not generated. Here's the synapse. Now realize in a ganglion, you're going to have hundreds and thousands of synapses because you're going to have hundreds and thousands of pairs of pre and postganglionic neurons. That's these. Here's the preganglionic. They're going to use some terms in this diagram that I have not held you responsible for. This is the end of the axon here, and this would really be the axon branch out here. Okay. On the other side is the dendrite of the postganglionic neuron. They're pointing out mitochondria. I guess they figured they'd be complete, but they didn't point out these larger uh, round structures. These are called synaptic vesicles. The synaptic vesicle already is waiting like a loaded gun. It has inside of it the neurotransmitter, two major neurotransmitters that we'll be talking about very, very soon. Okay. And these chemicals are able to excite the dendrite if they can reach it. Well, first, the axon hillock of the preganglionic neuron has to generate an impulse, and it comes down, splits up into the axon branches. And if it gets that far, it will explode, essentially, a synaptic vesicle. Here's one that's broken apart. They move towards the surface or plasmalemma, and out come the little particles, chemicals that we call neurotransmitters. All these little, I don't know if they're purple, they're very dark bluish dots. These are the neurotransmitters. The receptor cells here, not cells, receptors, are reached by the neurotransmitter, and if enough of them are reached, they'll send an impulse to the axon hillock of the postganglionic neuron, and if enough of them reach there, they send an impulse, and that goes to the organ that's being innervated. Since this is the autonomic nervous system, the organ being innervated by the second or postganglionic neuron is either the heart, smooth muscle of any organ or of vessels, or glandular epithelium. A repeat here that neurons do not travel alone, but in bundles called nerves. A large collection of these synapses are called a ganglion. Here's a cross section of the spinal cord with no bone present. They don't have everything present in this drawing. Most of them don't, but this is sufficient. The red color, the red coming in is sensory. It enters into the dorsal root ganglion. This is supposed to be the cell body of the neuron, and you can only imagine with hundreds or thousands of these cell bodies in here all going the same way, this is going to swell up considerably, and that's why the dorsal root ganglion is so large. The sensory impulse continues on and enters at the dorsal horn. This is the dorsal horn. Now, this can now go up to the brain, and the brain can decide to ignore it. The brain can decide to send back a motor impulse. Okay. But it can also happen that the sensory impulse comes in here, hits a structure called an interneuron. I will never ask you about interneurons, but they're interesting. They just come across, and now it goes immediately out. Okay. Here it's showing that it's going out to the voluntary nervous system. It's going back to a muscle. Okay. This comes from the body or the arm or the leg, and now you decide you must do something about it very quickly. And rather than wait for the brain to receive the information slowly through the gray matter, and slowly means just a fraction of a second, but that's too long for some things. The interneuron shuttles across to the ventral horn and starts the return trip on the efferent neuron to the voluntary nervous system. Okay, the idea here is you see an electric stove, and if you're stupid like me, I want to know which burner is hot, was hot, the others are off or whatever. So I put my hand flat out on the burner, and that's a mistake. That's a mistake. As a kid, at 5 years old, I think I'd know better. I'd go out in the morning, foggy in LA, and my mother would be getting my father his breakfast, a very old fashioned family, and I hated it. But I'd go outside behind the house that we rented from. An old Granny Laird had a cactus collection she really admired. She got a new cactus. It was beautiful. Looked like a pin cushion. It was so gorgeous. I just stood and looked at it. You know, 5-year-old interested in a plant. I guess that forebodes the future. Anyway, 2 days later, after looking at it and admiring it for so long, in the morning, this little 5-year-old kid turned around and sat down on it. And those spines went right through my blue jeans. I started screaming. I tried to get up. That was my first reaction, but it hurt so much to get up that I sat back down. My mother came out the screen door in a long white frock, which was typical to wear just after the war. And she looked at me sitting on a cactus. Here's her brilliant son sitting on a cactus. And she gives me the best advice. She says, "Get up, stupid." You know, and anyway, they finally got all the spines out. My reaction was quick. It was try to get up, although I couldn't. Put your hand on the stove, you pull it away without even thinking. Now, you know the brain is going to find out you did this, and you are going to feel the pain, and you are going to think about it. But before you can think about some things, your body will react quickly. And that's called a reflex arc. This is a reflex arc. In, get to the CNS. You've got to get to the CNS. Send some information up to the brain, but don't worry about it right now. Get moving. Go across. And now let's pull that arm back. A reflex arc. The sympathetic nervous system is also known as the thoracolumbar system because all of its preganglionic neurons arise in and emerge from the thoracic and lumbar vertebra only. We're going to have to look at a diagram to figure that out. Okay. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is known as the craniosacral system because all of its preganglionic neurons originate in the sacrum or the brain. And in the brain, they arise as the cranial nerves. Okay, well, let's make sense of that. I'm going to skip this for a moment and go to this kind of pretty diagram. Brain, cervical vertebra, thoraco and lumbar vertebra, sacral vertebra, and coccygeal vertebra. Let me go down. On the left-hand side, over here, the left-hand side represents innervation of organs, of smooth muscle, of the heart, and of glands, like the salivary gland here, by the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system will have a 2-neuron pathway. Okay, real quick, here's one neuron, a synapse, 2 neurons. Okay, the sympathetic nervous system is known as the thoracolumbar. Backing up, here it is, thoracolumbar system. because all of the preganglionic neurons arise in and emerge from the thoracic and lumbar vertebra, and only those. So just looking at the left side, forget the right side for now. We can take, I'm going to take this one, if you can see which one I've got. Okay, here's the vertebra here. This is the preganglionic neuron. Here it's synapsing with the ganglion itself. And then the postganglionic neuron, and that's going to the bladder. The preganglionic neuron anatomically is shorter than the postganglionic neuron. It's a characteristic always found for the thoracolumbar system, otherwise known as the sympathetic nervous system. This drawing takes a liberty, all of them do, of showing just one neuron attaching to one neuron, making our two-system pathway. However, we, having been told this many times, know that it's not a single neuron, it's hundreds or thousands of neurons, because that's a nerve, and that's a ganglion, not a synapse. No question on the test will confuse you when it comes to the difference between a ganglion and a synapse. Okay, well, we can see all of these ganglia are indeed kind of close to the spinal cord. They are also mirror imaged on the other side, but not drawn because we had to have space for the parasympathetic system. But it would look like this on the other side. These ganglia form a chain, like a group of beads. They're known as the chain ganglia. Here they're called the sympathetic chain. I like to use the word chain ganglia. And just one of these ganglia is a sympathetic trunk ganglia. You saw that in the model, the sympathetic trunk ganglia, all interconnect. You'll see next Tuesday how this arrangement really helps the body get primed very, very, very fast. In the sympathetic system, the preganglionic neuron, following it, arise at the synapse or ganglia area, and it secretes a neurotransmitter. In another picture I'm going to show you, that neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine. Acetylcholine transfers to the postganglionic neuron, reaches finally the organ, or the smooth muscle in this case, and then it transfers a neurotransmitter also. But it's not acetylcholine, it's adrenaline or noradrenaline. You would expect possibly that in the fight or flight system here, the sympathetic system, okay, the thoracolumbar system, all the same thing, that we might expect something to enhance things, make them move faster. And it's the neurotransmitter adrenaline, sometimes called noradrenaline. Okay, always I'll use the word adrenaline within the context. On this side is the parasympathetic system, and you'll see that its first neuron is going to arise out of the sacrum or the brain. Brain, sacrum. That's why it's called the craniosacral. Now, this first neuron here, preganglionic neuron, is the long one, ganglion. And then the short one is right here. The short one is the postganglionic neuron. The neurotransmitter between the first and second neurons is again acetylcholine. And finally, the neurotransmitter between the end of the postganglionic neuron and the tissue being innervated is also acetylcholine. Adrenaline is not used in this system. That's why it's not as fast. This system is not going to react to dangerous situations. It's probably going to shut down. You won't need to process food when you're trying to run away from somebody or something. So when you've got that uptight feeling, uh, it's due to the sympathetic system, not the other. Notice that the preganglionic neuron is again longer. Postganglionic neuron is shorter, the exact opposite of the other side. Here's a comparison of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Okay, and maybe it's just take a moment to uh, get it solid in your mind what we're talking about. We're talking about part of the efferent nervous system that comes from the peripheral nervous system and carries motor impulses. We're carrying motor impulses to the heart, to the glandular epithelium, and to all the smooth muscle of the body. Okay. This is the involuntary system. We can't think it. We can't make it happen. Like we can't make a fist. That's voluntary. This is the involuntary system. It's broken into two parts, sympathetic. The sympathetic neurons originate from the spinal cord in the thoracic and lumbar regions. The parasympathetic arise from the brain and the sacrum. Very distinct difference anatomically there. The sympathetic nervous system generally gets the body ready for fight or flight, although both systems are active at all times. The parasympathetic system dominates in less tense situations, but both are active at all times. In the sympathetic nervous system, You can't see the title at the top, so it reminds you. The preganglionic neuron is short and terminates in the chain ganglia. Postganglionic neuron is comparatively long. In the parasympathetic system, the preganglionic neuron is comparatively long and may terminate in the ganglia near the organ that's being innervated. The sympathetic nervous system is adrenergic. That means the synaptic vesicles at ganglia contain acetylcholine. The neuromuscular junction, a term I haven't used, that's where the second neuron reaches the smooth muscle. The neuromuscular junction has vesicles that contain norepinephrine. I use the term noradrenaline. Okay, they're both correct on the test. Uh, just to be sure that it's clear to you, I would put the second one in parentheses as a synonym. In the parasympathetic system, it's entirely cholinergic. That means that the synaptic vesicles within the ganglia and at the neuromuscular junction all contain acetylcholine.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's not kind of directly related. It is, but it isn't. I was wondering if you could explain what exactly is happening in the body when you're injected with epinephrine, like at the hospital, if you're having like a heart attack.
First off, I'm thinking of two things here. First, no, I can't tell you exactly what's happening. Okay. Second, I had a heart attack and they never came around with epinephrine for me.
I
That's
might be having the wrong thing. It might be when you're having like an allergic reaction or something. I can't
that'd be more
remember.
like it. Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. That was not a part of anatomy. I'm sorry.
No
Okay.
worries. I was just curious.
Well, no, I get curious all the time. I find myself Googling one thing after another, you know, and you tend to remember those things you Google. Okay, in this little diagram, in the sympathetic system, here's the first neuron. Remember, there's going to be two running from the spinal cord to the organ. So the first one's short and the second one is longer. When the first one reaches its end and we find a synapse, synapse is proper to say when there's only one neuron reaching one neuron, as in this picture. Okay, the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. In the parasympathetic system, the preganglionic neuron is longer, and when the synapse is reached, again, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter. Back up to the sympathetic system, okay, the postganglionic neuron is longer, and when it reaches the organ, the neurotransmitter is noradrenaline. Okay. Now, you can say norepinephrine just as correctly. But down here in this parasympathetic system, the neuromuscular junction, which what this is in both cases, neuro, nerve, muscle, smooth muscle. In the parasympathetic system, the neuromuscular junction is traversed by acetylcholine. This says exactly that. Here's a list of cranial nerves. They're part of the parasympathetic system. These need to be learned by their Roman numeral and function, not for Thursday. For Thursday, that one sheet I gave you said you were going to be asked cranial nerves, but I explained myself on last week, uh, and I told you you're only going to be asked on this test on Thursday cranial nerve 1, the olfactory bulb or lobe, cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve, and cranial nerve 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve. Those are the only three that you'll have to identify. And you don't have to write anything, you just have to name it from multiple choice. 1, 3, and 8. Now, for the next lecture test, which is some ways off yet, for the next lecture test, you'll need to know at least 5 of these. I won't tell you which 5, of course, so you obviously have to know them all. And they're all from this chart. You do need to memorize the entire chart, not hard. People make up little slogans using the first letter. Some I forget because they're boring. And the ones I remember, I can't repeat because they're obnoxious. Okay, but you can pass it along to each other if you want. Uh, some of the more obnoxious ones. Anyway, you need to know them. You need to know what they do. Okay. The olfactory, for instance, is for smell, and that's its sensory function. Does it have a motor function? No, it doesn't. So there's a blank there. The optic is for vision. Does it have a motor function? No, no, it doesn't. And the vestibulocochlear is for hearing and balance. And does it have a motor function? No. Okay. Now those are the only 3 you'll notice without motor functions. All the rest have a motor function. And it's very simply stated here. And many of them are the same. Not that many actually have both motor and sensory function. The trigeminal does, it has a sensory function and a motor function. And the facial has a taste and facial movement function. Okay. And down here, taste and heart rate for the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve has a lot of functions, but there's only 3. All the rest have only one function. In knowing these, I will identify in the question the nerve I want you to answer for by Roman numeral. I won't use numbers 1 to Arabic numerals. We use only Roman numerals. It's surprising how many people today don't know Roman numerals up to 12. We see clocks all over the place, uh, whether it's on a movie, television, or out in real life, and they might use Roman numerals. Okay, but I suppose most clocks use Arabic numerals these days, or just little lines. You'll have to know them by the Roman numerals 1 through 12. Okay, that was the end of that. Okay. Now, first off, I didn't realize I'd talk so long, but I wanted to get through that entire thing one time so that we have time to go through it a second time for those who need it. Okay. This is your opportunity, if I can call it that, to ask me to go over anything, any portion, uh, to leave you alone. We call that asynchronous. And uh, so, what do you need for Thursday? If you don't come up with something, what you're going to get is an extra half hour or so from our time to study.
I noticed for the ear, there are more um, like identifying words on the image than there are written in like the vocab section, the handwritten area. And I was wondering if we only needed to know the handwritten area that you had typed out or everything on the image as well.
Okay. Okay. Uh, is this the image you want, or further down?
Yes, this is the one.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to ask you temporal bone. No. Okay. I am going to ask you malus stapes. I'm not going to ask you middle ear. Okay. This is what I believe I've given you. I'm not going to ask you inner ear. Semicircular. Cochlea, yes. Round window, no. I didn't give it to you on the list. Vestibulocochlear nerve, yes. And eustachian tube, yes. I'm not going to ask the carotid arteries here. I'm going to do that on that human skull. I'm not going to ask the styloid bone. They're just doing that to give you a location reference. I am going to ask you the tympanic membrane, and I am going to ask you the pinna and the auditory canal. I am going to ask those. So here is a list above it that I wrote, and this is what I want you to find. And these are the ones I said I would just do right now. Nothing else.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I was also wondering for the brain, what exactly the fourth ventricle is and what purpose it serves. You're looking at the image, what exactly are you pointing to when you're saying fourth ventricle?
The slit.
Okay.
Is, I can enlarge it if you need it.
No, I think in the image down below, the slit shows easier.
Oh, much better. This one. Okay.
Yes.
This is the fourth ventricle. Okay. Uh, when the brain isn't cut like this is nothing's going to flow out. Okay. It stays in channels and moves throughout the brain. The lateral ventricle connects to it. There's a second and third ventricle, which we don't get to see because they're more to the lateral side of the brain. We cut down the center. All we can see is the lateral ventricle here. But there is another ventricle here and another ventricle back on the other side. I haven't shown it to you. I never show it. Okay. But all of them contain cerebral spinal fluid that nourishes the spinal cord itself. And essentially tries to keep the tissue healthy. This is connected to this. Trust me, I have never found the connection. Probably have to be an ant crawling through this somehow.
That's super interesting. Does the fluid ever, I guess, regenerate? Like,
Oh,
do you
yes.
ever get new clean fluid? And same with the fluid in the vestibule as well.
Yes. Yes, it does. Uh, it better throughout our entire life it would be a mess. But yes, it does regenerate.
Do you know what happens to the fluid? Is it just like absorbed into the tissues and then it comes from a certain location or anything like that?
There are inside of the spinal fluid, okay, inside of these chambers, a large chamber like this one, even a small one like this, and this also goes down into the spinal cord, you know, and you have phagocytes, cells that eat any debris that happens to be there. They're always there.
That's really interesting. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, don't forget this little guy here. It's very important. Uh, you and I didn't go over it together much. It's rather, I don't know, a little boring to do that. But you do need to know these functions of the parts of the brain. Just in brief. Just in brief.
I noticed in that it says that the pituitary gland is the master endocrine gland for the brain. And I was wondering if that includes like the whole entire body. Obviously, I mean the brain is the master of the body, but just curious.
It's the master endocrine gland in most books. Uh, I don't like the word master, but I can't get rid of it. It's in the brain. It's located in the brain, but all of the hormones that it produces affect other parts of the body. A hormone never has an effect on the organ that produces it. So they call it master because it's got 8 hormones at least that are known to be secreted by it. So I guess they can call it the master. But there's plenty of other hormones in the body that you and I wouldn't want to do without.
That's really interesting. I feel like I have a million questions coming off of that one, but I'll save those for another time. My only other question that I have right now is why does the aura serrata function the way that it does? And then hopefully anyone else who has questions can ask.
Okay, the aura serrata here. Let's see if I get a picture of it first. That's not a good picture of it. Uh, this is the aura serrata here. Okay, and what happens is when light comes into the posterior cavity here, it's supposed to hit the retina. Well, it usually does. There it is. If it doesn't hit the exact spot, the fovea centralis, it may be a little bit blurred. You may be farsighted or nearsighted, but that's correctable, we know. Okay? But we don't want the light bouncing around all over the place. So, for instance, light passing through the retina goes right through it. It's sheer. When you shine a light on one side of a bed sheet, and you see the light on the other side, the light goes through, and the choroid coat, that's this, absorbs it, so it doesn't bounce back out again. So you get a clearer picture. Well, light can still come in through the iris and the pupil. Here's the pupil. And light can come in from the side. Okay? Light can come in through the side, and it can hit the area occupied by the ora serrata. That wouldn't be bad if there were retina there to receive it, but there's no retina at that part of the eye. So the ora serrata acts sort of like a choroid coat, although it's a different color, usually darker, okay, to absorb light. It absorbs light. It has no effect like the ciliary body on the changing of the shape of the lens. Okay, the ciliary body down here does have that, but the ora serrata, its function is to absorb light coming in from the side.
That makes a lot more sense. Thanks.
Okay, this test looks like there's a lot of material, but you're not having the bulk of the nervous system material with it at this time. You are going to get nervous system material with that vertebra cross section, that model of the vertebra, okay, the cervical vertebra. Uh, that's that's pretty easy, fortunately. I'm going to give you the full length of time on it. Okay, please take your time. Be careful not to accidentally keep making lookaways, and especially uh, turn off your notifications. If you shouldn't be using a cell phone for a test, but if you're going to do it anyway, be sure you get all your notifications turned off, no phone calls coming in, any of that kind of stuff on a cell phone. Uh, just be read the wrong way by the test itself. Some of you had asked me how your score looks so far. It's the easiest thing in the world for you to figure that out because so far you have four major tests. You have five after Thursday. And all you have to do is take your calculator and add up the four tests and divide by four. And that gives you your percentage that you're running in the class. So 90, 80, 70 works. Uh, no one is lower than that anyway. If for some reason you need to drop or feel that you need to drop, Thursday was technically the last day. I know I told you they have an extended withdrawal date because of COVID. Uh, I don't know why they need that, but they've got it. I know nothing about it further. I know they sent you a message about it. So you can take advantage of that if you wish. But Thursday, the 15th, was technically the last day to drop. Well, if I assume that that's still the case, you will have time to see your grade that night. And if you have to drop or decide to for any reason, get it done by 11 o'clock when registration closes. I know you can do it later than that, but I just don't know those dates for this special extended withdrawal. Uh, so again, I hope nobody drops. Uh, okay, and I've contacted everybody in 110 that needed to have a discussion with me about whether they should or shouldn't drop. Contacted everybody about that and about the lookaways. Everybody that needed to hear something heard it. Okay, if you didn't hear anything, You didn't need to hear anything. Okay, I would say then I'm not going to hit you with anything else before the exam here. And you can put today's notes aside uh, until we meet again or until we finish the exam if you want want to stay up on things. Okay, so I'm awkwardly sort of waiting for questions. If I don't get any, that's fine. I hope that means you feel that they're going to be pretty comfortable with this. So if you wish to exit, that's fine. And I will wait around for uh, anybody that thinks of questions. I will wait also if you're still just looking for questions. Okay, you don't have to speak, but that if that's the case, I would appreciate it if you're waiting to ask questions that you put your video on. So many times I'm leaving and there's one or two people and they're not there. They've gone for ice cream or something. And I, I shout out their name and stuff. No, they're not there at all. Okay. So uh, good for Thursday.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Thank you.